OPEC Plus has agreed to make a steep production cut as a way of curbing supply in an already tight market, as well as dealing with rising interest rates in the West and a weak global economy. However, not all are on board with this decision. The U.S. has described the surprise decision as short-sighted. The cut in oil supplies puts a dent on U.S. President Joe Biden's move to deprive Moscow of oil revenue and lower oil prices in the global market. But Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee are on the same page as OPEC+. What's now left to be seen is how it would affect the global market on a wider scale in terms of oil stocks and prices, meeting supply demands, and soaring inflation as well as high interest rates. Joining me is Israel Aye. He's a partner at Commercial and Energy Law Practice and also a director at Aspen Nigeria Limited. Israel, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me. Okay, I think you're muted.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Great to hear you. So let's look at this in terms of what the U.S. has described this as a surprise. But given how oil has been behaving, the price of oil that is on the international market has been behaving in the past few months, did this decision really come as a surprise?
Well, yes, especially if you consider the fact that barely 3 months ago, or thereabout, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, took a trip specifically to Saudi Arabia to essentially solicit to OPEC through Saudi Arabia to pump more oil, especially, both to the American economy and perhaps not to allow too much benefit to pass to Russia. Essentially that was what they stated. So if you think about that, as well as the fact that there isn't even a crisis yet, typically these kinds of OPEC cuts would be in the face of plummeting oil prices. But this is a preemptive cut, if you will. In other words, it's just watching the trend and seeing that it looks like the global economy is heading towards a recession, and there are a lot of uncertainties regarding demand for petroleum products, oil and gas. And so what OPEC has said is that this particular cut is essentially a technical decision, or certainly not a political decision. And so for those reasons, and maybe more, this definitely has come as a surprise.
Okay, so we'll get into really if this is a technical or maybe also partially political decision in just a bit. But 2 million barrels are going to be cut from OPEC Plus members' crude outputs. How is the global markets responding to this right now? And do you also think it's possible for the oil cuts to actually spur recovery? We've seen the price of crude oil drop to about $90 a barrel from some $120 just a few short months ago.
Well, the question still remains what the sweet spot for oil would be for the foreseeable future. As you know, price volatility has been with the industry from inception till date. It goes up and it crashes, it goes up and it crashes. When prices are too high, if they're in the $100 region, people start to feel a bit uncertain because almost inevitably, then it is heading towards a crash. And there are, I've heard analysis that suggests that maybe somewhere around $70, is what is sustainable across time until perhaps, the transition is full. But, but when it crashes, it can crash very quickly. And I'm not sure that it is the drop from 100 to about $90 that was the concern. It is the trend. Is that if there is a likelihood that it is likely to keep dropping until it hit the $60, $50 regions, then it becomes problematic to OPEC and OPEC Plus countries. But the phenomenon of OPEC Plus is really something that, depending on what side you are on, that's come to be with us in recent times. In the past, it was OPEC, and OPEC was maybe, I don't want to say useless, because Norway is not in OPEC, so is Venezuela, so is I'm not sure about Russia. Russia is definitely not in OPEC, and the rest of it. So even when OPEC made the decision to cut, it was possible for these other producers, large producers potentially, to essentially balance that. But today you have an OPEC plus agreement and makes it a significantly stronger cartel, if you will. And yes, that cut is likely, I mean, if it is observed and if there's no cheating within that sort of cartel, then would have at least the impact of stabilizing price, and keep it at those sort of $70 to $90 levels.
So let's stay on this conversation around the impact. So this 2 million looks about 2% almost of the global supply. And this is coming at a time when, as you said, there are fears of a global recession. We have high interest rates and inflation running around. Can this cut have any impact on those situations that many countries around the world are feeling? African economies have been feeling the situation with high fuel prices and imported inflation as well. Could a reduction in the production have any positive impact at this point in time? And even if it's not positive, what impact do you expect it to have?
Well, I mean, I don't know about positive. Essentially, when you're talking about, I mean, again, so this really comes to economic management and from a country to country basis. So the way the United States is reacting or responding to this is to release more from its strategic reserves to try and mitigate the impact of the cut. I mean, I have read some analysis that say, well, the impact of this particular cut is probably not going to be greater than, sort of 1% shift in the indices, but that is left to be seen. But the kinds of decisions you'd see will be the release of strategic reserves. It probably would be a reversal. And so my sense is that the United States, which is crying the loudest, is probably in that position because of the position, because of the rhetorics that you hear around energy transition, around renewables and the likes of it. Because the United States of America has the capacity to balance this out somewhat, particularly with respect to its own consumption, both in terms of releasing its strategic reserves and releasing some of the, to step up fracking and those sources of production to try and rebalance the situation a bit. We're not seeing that. Maybe they will be forced to reverse themselves and push back the energy transition timelines that they're carrying a bit. We read recently the UK is looking to grant, or perhaps is looking to grant fracking licenses and opening up that space, which is a bit of a surprise. So those are probably the things you're going to see in the short term. But at the end of the day, the impact will vary from state to state, in country to country. And so there will be winners and there will be losers. There will be rebalancing. Even for those who have to supply less volumes, probably compensate for that with more income. And so it will sort of balance out eventually at this level. I don't see any wide
ranging effect
at this point in time.
So I like the fact you've taken us to winners and losers. So let's sort of domesticate this a bit more. Who are the OPEC Plus members that you think are most likely to be affected? And let's particularly look at Angola, which recently overtook Nigeria as Africa's largest crude oil producer, Libya too. So the top three, we're looking at Angola, Libya, and Nigeria. What do you think the impact of this 2 million barrels per day cut is going to be on them? Also factoring the fact that a country such as Nigeria has struggled to even meet its production quota. So there have been a number of countries who have struggled to meet their OPEC production quota in the past few months now. So how does that sort of play out for people like Angola, Libya, and Nigeria?
Yeah, so that's Angola, Libya, and Nigeria. To a reasonable extent, Gabon is also a significant producer, but not probably in the league of Angola, Nigeria, Libya, as you have mentioned. For Nigeria, unfortunately, because of the fact of subsidy, and the fact that we have not been able to build or to increase refining capacity in order to be able to meet our internal consumption, we tend to suffer in any price regime, whether prices are high, whether prices are low. So what we find now is that, it's a double whammy. It's a double whammy, unfortunately for us. Why? Because even the reduced quota, we're probably not meeting. So we're not necessarily getting the benefit of the price increase that's been with us for a fair bit. So that's something we need to solve. and that's on the one hand. On the other hand, high oil prices inevitably lead to increase in petroleum products, at least from the sort of destination price, which sort of knocks on and becomes a bit more. And so whatever we get with one hand, we probably just give away with the other. And that's the point I was making earlier on, that the impact would vary from country to country. At this point in time, I'm not entirely sure how Angola stacks with respect to managing petroleum products. But if I had a bit more time, I probably would touch base with that and be able to analyze it. But on the broad scale, African countries tend to suffer in any of these situations for exactly the reason I have stated, that until we promote domestic utilization and we add value to petroleum products and we're able to, then we can withstand the shocks a bit more and benefit from any price regime. So it's down to economic management, really, of your resource.
So you mentioned politics a little bit earlier, and some believe that there is some politics at play right now with people choosing sides, whether they believe they're choosing sides or not. And we heard from Saudi Arabia's energy minister, Abdulaziz bin Salman Al Saud, and he says that he believes that the U.S.-led initiative to slap a price cap on Russian oil is also adding to the uncertainty in the market, and that the cartel, that's OPEC Plus now, has preemptively moved to deal with any fragility. So we're seeing resource control, and also seems to be some type of agenda also at play at this. Do you think the world is in a way paying for the U.S.'s attempt to sort of take Russia down a peg or two?
Well, I mean, as the saying goes, when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. But what you probably are seeing is also a clear statement from especially OPEC, and maybe not so much of the Russian plots, refusing to be that grass. So what they're doing is making an informed decision based on their own priorities and not choosing sides. I honestly am inclined to believe that the OPEC component, particularly as led by Saudi Arabia, is not necessarily choosing sides. What OPEC has done is a preemptive cut to arrest a potential decline in prices based on the fact that, and by the way, the Ukraine-Russian war, the Russian-Ukraine war itself is having that impact of creating, it's already creating that effect of uncertainty in the market, and that is affecting various economies and tipping the global economy into a recession. So that's not a situation that OPEC created, and OPEC, in my opinion, is not and should really not be in a position where they're required to pick sides. I mean, that's why OPEC came together in the first instance. If you remember, in the heydays of non-aligned countries, most OPEC countries were in fact of that particular leaning. So I wouldn't necessarily subscribe to the point of view that OPEC has picked sides and is probably supporting Russia. It just so happens that Russia is a producer, and at this point in time, Russia would align with what OPEC wants to do because it is in its own interest. I imagine that if tomorrow it's in the interest of OPEC to pump more oil and to get more benefit, more benefit in the market, they will do exactly that.
All right, so Israel, I'll wrap up by asking you to look at this imaginary crystal ball in front of you. You said OPEC Plus has made this decision based on watching the trend and possibly trying to get ahead of what could be a global recession. We're firmly now into October, the last quarter of 2023, or I beg your pardon, 2022. I'm thinking ahead in the future. What do you think we're going to see for crude oil prices towards the end of the year, wrapping things up? There's usually some kind of surge in December with traveling and holiday and all those things. But do you think we're going to see those normal trends play out as we wrap up this year?
Well, we're in autumn months. In a short while, it will be winter. And typically, energy consumption goes up during the winter, which goes into typically around February. And so with the cuts, if they're sustained and if they're honored, what I'll probably predict is that prices will probably be maintained at current levels. They may go up a bit, and so we're probably going to see price stability till about at least the winter months. But again, in the oil world, one day is a long time. Let's hope that another war doesn't break out.
All right, so we'll leave it at that. We'll all have to be looking for those trends. Israel, thank you so much for joining me. If there are any new developments, as you said, one day is a long time. We'll definitely be reaching out to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.